Kenny, you received a diagnosis from the doctors that changed your life.
Yeah. So New Year's Eve 2015, going into 2016, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor on my brainstem.
What led up to it? I mean, what were the
So
symptoms?
I'd had some health problems. I had eventually we found out what it was later, but I'd been exhibiting some neurological issues, some autoimmune issues, and the doctors were really trying to find if I had Parkinson's or MS. They did a brain scan to check for those things, and thankfully they found the tumor. The only symptom of the tumor I had was I had lost feeling in my hands and feet, but I didn't know it. Like your body compensates, and so until the neurologist pointed out, I didn't know. They basically were like, it's malignant, it's inoperable, hope you can find a surgeon, kind of good luck was the way it came about. We went looking for a surgeon.
Where were you at this time? What city?
So I was pastoring a church outside Asheville, North Carolina, in a little town called Marion. We actually went to Asheville to try to find a surgeon. The surgeon, it was like the last lady I did with this kind of surgery, her face didn't quite come back right. So we're just, in this storm of what is going to happen? How is this going to work out? And the Lord, through a number of things, actually ended up getting us to Duke University, where I was able to be operated on by the guy who is the leading surgeon in the world for that tumor. And they were able to remove it. But after the removal, my health continued to deteriorate. It wasn't getting better. And eventually it got to the point where the doctors told me I could sit upright in a chair for 30 minutes, but then I had to rest. Like I couldn't work anymore. And that was a very hard, difficult time. And eventually we found out that I have a genetic disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that creates a whole number a whole cluster of symptoms that are hard to deal with, and it changes over time, and it gets worse, and it's hard. It's hard.
How did you deal with the news? You just had a newborn.
I did.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, as with anyone, would probably deal. It was scary. Very, very much a grief and a shock. Our youngest, our baby, who doesn't like to be called a baby anymore because he's 8 now. But he was with us at the doctor's office when we heard the news of the diagnosis. And the Lord showed a grace to us in that as well. I look back in that particular baby, he wouldn't take a bottle for anything. And so he was with me all the time. And it was a comfort not only to have my kid, but to have a responsibility to take care of him and my other kids in the midst of wanting to just break down and worry or break down in grief, having them help keep one foot going in front of the other because they needed me, they needed us.
You had him at the hospital
Still.
while I was going through surgery and recovery as well.
And he was just a happy baby, which was a grace. But I mean, of course, it was very trying. A lot of verses that I had known. Funny enough, I was just studying on suffering before I had Nate, my youngest. And it was funny, all the verses that kept coming back to about suffering well and what it looks like for a Christian to suffer were all coming to light right before I had my youngest son. And I was thinking, Lord, what are you doing? Is my baby going to be okay? And it turns out 3 months later, Kenny had this diagnosis. And the verses that I'd studied primarily thinking about 1 Peter or Philippians 4 about not being anxious. Well, what does that look like? Well, it says right before not being anxious that the Lord is at hand, like he really is with us. So I can bring my specific request, as Philippians 4 says, to him. And so I did, sure enough did, asking the Lord specifically what I wanted and thanking him at the same time, because that's what he says in his word. And he did. He brought my heart a lot of peace. The fact of the matter is that he doesn't always answer in the way that I want at the same time. I know that's not news for anybody. We know this. But the fact that he is God and he is good and that he does rule and reign above these situations, he's always kind, whether or not what happens feels kind or not. He is always good in that same way. So anyways, the Lord just brought my heart a lot of comfort in that. But namely, I wanted my kids to have a papa. We call him Papa in our home. And I just didn't, of course, want anything to happen.
I think, too, most people say, well, I couldn't go through that or I couldn't do that. And the fact of the matter is we just don't know what we can and can't do until the Lord puts us in the position. And when you're there, you do what you have to do, you know?
How was that year recovering, after the surgery?
We kept waiting for life to get back to whatever normal was supposed to be when you have 2 toddlers and a newborn and a husband that just had surgery. And whatever new normal it wasn't quite working its way there. Kenny's health kept getting worse. And then fast forward to the beginning of 2017, the doctor told him that he couldn't work anymore. And
what was that like for you?
It was hard. I was in my early 30s, and all of a sudden I couldn't mow my lawn. I fell off my lawnmower. I couldn't do all the things that I felt like I should be doing. I was the breadwinner. I was supposed to be the strong one in the family, so to speak. And it was hard. It was hard giving those up and trusting that the Lord has something good there, and to appreciate the things that I could do. And there's a lot of things now that I can do that I thought I would never be able to do. And so I've learned to appreciate them more. But yeah, you feel there's a sense of almost worthlessness, even though that's wrong, but that's where your mind can go.
But did you have your PH.D. by then, or
I was working
hold?
on my dissertation.
Okay.
So I wasn't able to finish the dissertation, but I did 10 years of PhD work and worked for Southeastern for a short time as an adjunct professor. But yeah, trying to shuffle the research and the papers and the work on top of caring for a church and family was trying.
And the stress that it put on you.
Like Kenny said, I mean, you don't always choose the situations that you're in, but you take it one step at a time. And I feel like the Lord also maybe, of course I'm not him, but I can't help but think he allows these things sometimes to maybe show us that Christ really is all that we have. And in that, these situations can be a gift. And I say that gently because I know how that can apply, and that is hard. Again, the Lord, I think of 1 Peter, how the Lord uses these events to refine our faith and to cause us to cling to Christ. And for that, I'm grateful for those markers to be able to look back and see how he carried us, how he helped us. Do I want to relive it? No. But do I know that awful things can happen? Yes, they can. But our God does indeed rule and reign above these things, and we can cling to Christ.
Claire, you had to make a lot of changes in your life after finding out that Kenny's couldn't work anymore. Can you share that with me?
Well, at the time, we had just finished our first year of homeschooling. It was preschool, so it was simple, but we still had just finished our first year of homeschooling, and then we realized our plan wasn't going to go as we planned because I needed to work. And in trying to figure out what steps were next, the thing that the Lord laid on my heart was to work at and pursue music, which sounds crazy. It sounded crazy to me, but the Lord just provided every step of the way. I ended up teaching music, and he provided a place to teach music. He provided students so that by the end of that year, I was full-time teaching music lessons, and we did our first recital at Christmas that year at the end of 2017. And it was such a gift to be able to teach them, but then also to still be with my kids and help homeschool them. That was important to us, and I felt like it was such a grace to be able to do that, to help the kids with the transition of having all the changes that were going on in our life, to Papa being sick and we had to move. And so at least school was the same and consistent for them. Then, so I taught music, and then I would be home often working on my own music as I'm teaching it. I was encouraged to work on my own craft. And Kenny would join me. He would start in the living room saying, hey, what do you think about this chord for you're working on? Or what if you started this song this way? Or here, I have a poem. Why don't you put music to it, or I would just snatch his poems and put music to it. But we realized we wrote together, and just one thing led to another, to where when the Lord had blessed the music teaching, Kenny started teaching with me as he was getting better and as his health got better. And it's a long story. It's really cool just to look back and see how the Lord worked the details together. But it ended up to what we do now, to be able to travel and play and share music. That is very much in a nutshell, but that's how the Lord carried us through that crazy season. He did.
He used all that darkness and difficulty to bring us around to do what we've always wanted to do.